minutes after 6 o'clock, and I do want to honor the time of those who have arrived on time. I do want to begin by thanking you all for coming out on this cold, wet night after a long day at work. I do also want to let you know that we do appreciate your commitment to this process. We do recognize that it's been time consuming, but I am also sure that you've learned a whole lot more about Portland Public Schools than you probably ever thought you'd imagine. And your input has been invaluable to us. So thank you so much for the ongoing collaboration. This is our 9th meeting of the Southeast Guiding Coalition series. It has been a very productive journey so far for us, and I believe that it has been rewarding for you as well. We have every reason to believe that we will attain the goals set forth by this committee because of your insight, your commitment, and your dedication to our process. As was stated last week, today is our last meeting before the open house, which will take place on the 19th of November, 2020. Consequently, we, with much anticipation, look forward to a culmination of the brilliant thinking that's occurred over the last 8 meetings. Your ongoing communication via phone calls and emails, your feedback, and your meeting evaluation submissions and survey responses have been very helpful in helping us design a process that is very inclusive. Thank you. In keeping with our established timeline for phase 1, we have, based on your input, been able to identify 3 scenarios which promote the recurring themes from the group and move us closer to the goals of the phase 1 process. Just as a reminder, the goals for the phase 1 process are to establish a feeder pattern for Kellogg and to convert Harrison Park from a K-8 to a 6-8 while using the racial equity social justice lens as a framework for the decision making. Tonight, the 3 scenarios will be presented, hoping that one of the 3 will be presented at the open house scheduled for November 19th. We will hold 3 meetings in December to further refine the scenario presented at the open house before a final submission to the Deputy Superintendent. As you discussed tonight, please consider the outcome goals set forth in Session 1, which are optimization of the use of facilities, supporting equitable programming, minimizing program co-locations. We will also revisit emerging themes later in this presentation. Please remember to strive to give everyone 100% of their ask, pardon me. Please remember that as we strive to give everyone 100% of their asks, it is very difficult, near impossible. Therefore, we ask that you be willing to compromise and to accept non-closure as we set the ask. Your input has been very rich and helpful. We've made good progress because of your contributions. We are very excited to see some light at the end of the tunnel for phase 1. Remember that at the end of the meeting, you will be asked to complete an evaluation form, and you'll also be asked to complete a feedback form for the session. Next slide, please. The meeting objectives for tonight are to select a proposal for presentation at the November 19 open house. We will also review virtual open house format and identify volunteers who hopefully will be coalition members who can participate in the live recorded program. Next slide, please. In tonight's schedule, we will look at our meeting objectives and agenda review. We'll have community engagement and open house updates, final phone survey results, focus groups will also participate in this conversation, and we'll talk about open house planning. At 6:20, we will review emerging themes and scenarios. At 6:30, we'll have the first breakout session, and we'll have a report out at the end of that breakout session. Then we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll head on into breakout session 2 and have a report out at the end of that breakout session. And then we'll have a consensus, a decision-making period to determine which of the scenarios has emerged as the top scenario to take to the open house. The reason we strive to have one scenario is we really want us to coalesce around certain themes and ideas, and to be able to, as much as possible, be inclusive of all the needs that we want, and to not have a win-lose situation. We want it to be such that it is a collaborative process. It is something where we all can agree to at least abide by the guidelines and the determinations that the group has made. At 8:55, we'll ask for volunteers. So if you're willing to volunteer for the open house participation presentation piece, please let us know so that by the end of the evening, at least we'll be able to get 2, maybe 3 people who can spearhead that process. At 9 o'clock, we hope that we will adjourn this meeting and start our preparation towards the open house. Next slide, please. Our group agreements remain the same. We are asking that you please stay engaged emotionally, intellectually, physically, to pay as much attention to the discussions that are being had in your group. Remember, this is the last night before open house. So this is when we really need 100% of involvement and attention. Speak your truth responsibly. Yes, there are things that will not be pleasing to people, and there are areas where people will not feel that their voices were heard. I will assure you that we listen to everybody's voice. We considered every option available to us based on your input and based on the email communications and surveys that we've received. Please listen to understand and to believe that this is truly an open process. We don't have any kind of predetermination as to what we want or don't want. Everything is grassroots driven, and it is going to be based on what information we have from you. Be willing to do things a little bit differently and experience discomfort. We know that boundary change is fraught with emotion, and sometimes it is very, very difficult to see the forest from the trees. But we ask that in this case that you try as much as possible to at least consider different perspectives, other viewpoints, and help us get to our goal. Expect and accept non-closure. That's always a part of a discussion process. There are things that you just live with and you accept for the sake of the greater good. Next slide, please. Jed.
I'm with you.
Okay.
So
I couldn't see you. I'm like, where is Jed?
I'm here. So I just wanted to give folks a quick reminder of some information that went out a little bit earlier this week. We did get the final phone survey report, and it's just a really great resource for those who are looking to hear from, especially our BIPOC families. You see here on the slide that almost 50% of the respondents in the phone survey identified as Black, Latino, Native American, Pacific Islander, or multiracial. And that representation is a higher percentage compared to the enrollment in our study area, as well as just the neighborhood demographics overall. It is a big report. The full report, 205 pages, but it includes the verbatim responses from parents and guardians, and it is categorized by race and ethnicity as well as by program type. So neighborhood, Spanish DLI, we have creative science in there as well, in addition to the other, to Japanese, Chinese as well. And then of course, if you just need the highlights, there is a summary and insights report. That's really more the quantitative results that you can take a look at there. But I really strongly encourage you to take a look at that, look at the verbatim responses as we're having the survey input come in through the open house. It'll just be a good additional resource for you to consider as we move into December's work. Next slide.
And this picture provides some steps that we have taken and steps that we are taking to hear additional feedback from students, from families, from teachers, and folks in our greater community through the survey that we just talked a little bit about, in addition to an open house and focus groups. Will be some key efforts we are getting ready to hear from a wide range of folks from. And so focus groups throughout next week, in addition to the open house, will be spaces where the work that you all have been developing on scenarios and the emerging themes that are most pressing to get further feedback and reflection on. We'll have some refinement as well from our community in those spaces. And so we're continuing to broaden our awareness and get that feedback and appreciate some of the support as well that members of the coalition have been giving, suggestions, reviewing tools, etc. And so thank you for your support and thought partnership as we continue to have those strands of continuous discussion with folks in our community. Can move on to the next slide.
Jed?
Okay, Esther, I was just making sure. So just wanted to give folks an idea of what's planned for the virtual open house next week. So we have a draft web interface, kind of a scrollable, mobile-friendly web interface that's waiting in the wings for a proposal. It has the process overview. It'll have the web map in there. It'll also have a survey. We're going to be asking 3 open-ended questions in addition to some self-identification there. But the 3 open-ended questions, very, very broad. What do you like about the proposal? What concerns do you have? And what else would you like to share with the guiding coalition? The website's going to be available to the public on the 16th. So earlier next week, it's going to be part of the support for the focus group work that's going to happen early next week. And then the survey will open the evening of the 19th as we are providing the live programming piece. Next slide. So as mentioned, there will be a live element of this. It's going to be embedded in the website and recorded, so that can be viewed for a few days afterward. So the format of that's going to be about a 30-minute presentation, and then we're going to have some breakout rooms where there will be a moderated video and chat Q&A. We'll be looking for tonight some brave volunteers to speak to the proposal with respect to how it performs regarding the guiding principles, the strengths and challenges, just overall. And of course, we'd like to speak to the racial equity and social justice lens as well. And then we'd like, in addition to those folks or different folks, about 4 to 8 volunteers to help out with the breakout Q&A sessions, just to be there to answer questions when they're seeking to hear from coalition members. Next slide. So am I cruising along here, Esther?
You have slide. Yes, I'm sorry. As you can see, there is a tally for how we voted for the different scenarios. And based on this tally, that's how we arrived at the 3 top scenarios that will be shared tonight. And hopefully we'll be able to narrow that down to 1. Next slide, please. So in narrowing down the slides to one, we do want to talk a little bit about our emerging themes. When we talked about our outcome goals from the beginning, the very three, optimizing the use of facilities to enhance PK learning environments, as stewards of taxpayers' funds, we want to ensure that we are responsible with our facilities and with our space. Consequently, we are looking at every building and we're looking at all our space use to ensure that we do have room for the programs that we intend to run in that building. For example, if we intend to house special ed students in the building, we want to make sure that the space is adequate, it is habitable, it is presentable for all our students. If we also want to run DLI programs, we want to ensure that we do have the strands that we need in the building to enable our students be successful. Our goal is to keep our capacity rates at about 80%. In some cases, it might exceed it a little bit, but that is our plan. In looking at our supportable, equitable programming to improve student experiences across all grade levels, especially at our middle schools, we want to make sure that whatever programs we start at the elementary level can be continued through middle school, through high school. For example, research does say it takes at least 8 years to learn or master any new language. If you're at a K-5 school, that means that you do have to spend the next 3 years at the middle school and hopefully continue learning the language as you proceed into high school. So our goal is to design our programs so we have a pathway. Our goal is also to identify more middle schools for our students and at the same time preserve a lot of our K-8 neighborhood schools for those who have a preference for K-8 schools. We believe that speaking multiple languages, more than one language, is an asset. It will always be an asset. I speak 4 languages, and I am hoping that it is just a national practice that everyone speaks at least more than one language. So our goal here in PPS is to continue to support our language experiences for all our students as they travel from one level of education to the next. Our strategy is also to make sure that we do provide opportunities for collaboration between the students who are second language learners and native speakers to create a more robust environment for academic performance and for all our students. In terms of minimizing co-locations, we do want as much as possible to ensure that we eliminate as many inequities as possible. So that means that if we have one strand of a dual language in the school, we want to make sure that it is balanced so that the kids in that neighborhood or the kids who transfer in to learn that language have the opportunity to engage in it. Our theory of action prioritizes our communities based on their needs, and we also make sure that we try to target universalism practices across the board. Next slide, please.
As you think about, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say that we also would like to eliminate portables. And that said, I'd like to yield the floor to Danny to add some more.
Sorry about that. So good evening, everyone. So as we've been on this journey together and trying to think about how we start to make some movement on creating some scenarios that we can sort of get behind to be able to present to the community for even more deeper discussion and evaluation. The staff at PPS have wanted to provide, just as Esther has done, some more detail about sort of how the overarching goals of the process really have some next layers of information so that you can consider that as you consider the next set of scenarios for everyone. What we want to do tonight is we want to start to think about how we as a collective can start to build some consensus, or how we can start to move through some of the places where there might be some tensions or where there might be some push-pull in some of the conversations that we've heard. So in looking at the feedback that we got in the last survey and looking at the streams of emails, as well as looking at the many sort of conversations that you've had in these workshops on Thursday nights, we're starting to notice that there are some emerging themes and some tensions that we wanted to, rather than start with the scenarios, wanted to give everyone an opportunity to think about sort of like where your group sort of like lands on this, and to encourage folks to see where there might be some opportunity for some common ground. So we wanted to present the sort of goals with a little bit more information prior to, and then to put up for your consideration and for some further discussion, some emerging themes that we thought. So one of the things that we've heard is that when you have a dual strand of programming, that where it's split, where you might have a DLI program or a neighborhood program, that can often be difficult in terms of building community at school. You might have the DLI community who feels like there is an integration into the sort of fabric of the neighborhood because they may be sort of utilizing transportation to come in, or you may feel that the neighborhood, or there may be instances where the neighborhood students may feel like they're not getting something that the DLI students may be getting in their programming. So that's one sort of tension that we've heard, and there were quite a few sort of chat streams sort of where people were kind of sharing like how that sense of community can be difficult in the execution of the DLI strands. We've also heard another tension that when we talk about having a school that is solely focused on a focus option, that sort of concentration can create an inequity of experience throughout the district, where you have schools that have one thing happening and schools where that's not happening. The sense of inequity can be rather high. I think another theme that we're hearing is that when we talk about equity, different people, and this is very common in PPS, different people tend to think very differently about what demographic equity they're trying to achieve. And I think as we sort of think about that, we've heard how different populations or different subpopulations have sort of emerged as different priorities. We've heard quite a bit of tension about wanting to make sure that the high schools don't get overcrowded, but the real reality and the tension in some of the scenarios in creating that overcrowded, the sort of overutilization, if you will, in the scenarios. We've also heard a lot of discussion and sort of tension around really wanting to avoid single strands in any sort of K-5 program, and also making sure that it doesn't happen in middle school. And folks talked about, like, especially for a neighborhood program, we've heard a little bit of discussion about that. Another sort of tension that we're starting to hear is the interplay between transportation and what that means in terms of what students and families value in terms of, and sort of how transportation can be experienced differently as burdensome or as a sort of connection to opportunity. And these transportation implications are really exacerbated by the real estate market and by the gentrification and displacement that our city is experiencing. And then I think the other place of tension that we've heard has been around the use of portables and what that means in terms of in terms of like space utilization. In some of our surveys, we've heard that the use of portables is not seen as negative if it means access to different programming. So I bring up these tensions, these themes to you all, because I'd like for you in your breakout group to start to think about like to understand within your own group where different team members sort of fit, and to see if there's opportunity to find common ground on these emerging themes, because that might then help us be able to reconcile some of the different opinions about the way that we approach prioritizing some of the scenarios. So what we tried to do is that we tried to model that. And so over the last couple of days, we've spent a lot of time looking at the sort of highest prioritized scenarios, 9 and 10, in the survey. And then we try to see how might we try to reconcile some of these emerging themes or these tensions by making some modifications. I would say that one of the overarching themes that we really tried to approach is that we wanted to minimize disruption, except where disruption could really be a lever for creating more racial equity. And so we wanted to really be judicious about the way that we sort of tried to make changes. And so we really, as a group, tried to limit that. So Jed is going to explain a little bit about how we arrived at scenario 11. We're going to come back and talk with much greater detail about scenario 11. But right now, what I want everyone to focus on are these themes, these sort of like tensions. It may not be that we have, we may have more than the ones that are listed here, and that's fine. We can talk about that in our group. But I think if we try to approach our work where we're trying to find that like common ground where the perspectives can collide in a positive or sort of forward moving way, that might help us kind of break through some of the places where we're getting stuck as a collective around our approaches with these scenarios. So I'm going to turn it over to Jed now.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I'm gonna, as we move to the next slide here, gonna just walk you through the middle scenario column here, which is that blend between scenario 10 and 9, and just really through 5 main elements here, just to give you a sense of that. I know that this information went out not too long ago, so a lot of you haven't had a chance to look at that too much, so I want to give you the highlights of that. So in scenario 11, the neighborhood feeder patterns are Creston, Arleta, Marysville, and Lent to Kellogg. And then Bridger and Atkinson to Harrison Park. And these are the changes, actually. And then Vestal and Glencoe to Mount Tabor. And then for the dual language immersion feeder changes, Lent's program would go to Kellogg. And the Bridger Chinese and Atkinson Spanish would go to Harrison Park. And we can go to the next slide here. For the high school feeders, Kellogg and Harrison Park will both feed to Franklin, which is similar to what we saw in both scenario 9 and 10. Mount Tabor will go to Madison, again, similar to those other two. And Sunnyside feeding to Cleveland here, which is what we saw in scenario 10, but not in 9. For the DLI program movement, we have, in this scenario, there's a split of the Bridger K-5 Spanish dual language immersion going half to Atkinson and half to Lent. And then for Harrison Park, the Chinese K4 that's there right now moves to Bridger. And then for neighborhood program movement, the Harrison Park K5 neighborhood, the main change here is that it's split between Bridger and Vestal, as we've seen in some of the other scenarios, as well as there have been some slight adjustments to elementary boundaries as well that you'll see in the web map that started from one of the feeder patterns that scenario 10 was built upon. So this table here will be available in your note taker's sheet. So you can refer to that. There's also links for your note taker to the full feeder pattern, which also went out a little bit earlier today. So you'll have those resources there to digest this a little bit more and compare across to scenario 9 and 10 as you go through the exercise of thinking through the themes that Danny talked through.
All
Ready for
right.
the next slide.
Maybe, can I ask a question?
Sorry. So I didn't
Can I
hear
ask a
anything.
question?
I can't tell who it is. Who is this?
Jennifer.
Oh, Jennifer. Yes, Jennifer.
Yeah, before we go into the breakout session, can I ask a clarifying question about scenario 11?
You know what? I'm going to put a pause on that one because we do want folks to review scenario 11, but in this first breakout session, we really want you to focus in on these themes. So is this going to take us into the details of scenario 11 or more about how we arrived at scenario 11?
Well, I think one of the themes is how each demographic group will be impacted. And I guess I just want to make sure we have a clear understanding of when we're talking about splitting a program, how will that program be split? Is it geographic address or that's all?
So I can answer that.
Okay.
So yeah, that was one of the challenges with splitting a dual language immersion program, which we had not done to date with any of our scenarios. And the logic that was used there were the students that were closest to each of those schools. So it was geographic, and then just an even split from Bridger to Atkinson and Lent, and then at the grade 6 through 8 level between Kellogg and Harrison Park.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Jennifer. So as I said, we're going to go into the first breakout session. So in your groups, what we'd really like you to do is to discuss the themes. And so you all got a worksheet that has sort of like some of the ways that we've sort of tried to address different aspects of all of the scenarios against those themes. But what I really want to encourage folks to do is not necessarily get into the details of each of the different scenarios, but to really think about, like, in those themes, like how is that impacting your group's ability to get to sort of like a landing on a scenario? Where are folks sort of like really kind of experiencing either that dissonance or maybe sort of like shared opinion about one thing or another, and how can the group sort of think to find common ground in those scenarios? And so then as you think about those themes and sort of like where you might try to find common ground, before you review in-depth scenario 11, we want you to think about like what might be your group's implication for that. And then as Jennifer modeled, I think one of the things that we want you to think about in terms of the themes that are kind of arising is continuing to ask that question about like, how are we expanding opportunity for racial equity and social justice? Like how does the resolution or does the common ground in each of these themes impact different demographic groups? Where might there be some unintended consequences? And are there strategies in place to mitigate any negative impact? And I would encourage folks to think about that third bullet point about strategies to mitigate, because I think what we're finding as everyone is putting in so much work to try to find scenarios that really sort of speak to, like, you know, a district-wide, a Southeast-wide sort of solutions, we find that there really is no perfect solution to really sort of hit everyone. And so where can we really go deeper into finding strategies that mitigate, right? How can common ground help us get into that mitigation place? So we hope that you have a really robust discussion. I want to encourage you and I want to reassure you that we have quite a bit of time for you to discuss the 3 scenarios in depth. But just to kind of warm up and to start kind of going through that practice of trying to find where that common ground is, where are things that we can mitigate for some potential impacts, we do want you to really discuss those themes and to be reflective in your group to think about how those themes are impacting your work together. And of course, where you can find the common ground. So we're going to go ahead and turn you over to your groups. I just had a infarction in my brain, so I think we're going to be there for a half hour. And so that's the right time, I believe. Sorry, Claire. And then so then we'll come back. And the fabulous Nate is going to get us there into our breakouts.
I should be in Team Flaville as note taker.
Great beyond. Well, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a robust discussion. I guess I wanted to kind of have a quick conversation with everyone, kind of report out about the discussion about the themes. And so I'm gonna take a lot of facilitators license today. I don't know if you've heard about it. I don't know where you get this license, but I'm gonna take this license, and I'm gonna really try to focus us not to necessarily get to the details of the scenarios yet, but to really sort of focus in on these sort of themes and try to figure out like where is your group starting to find some common ground, and then we can talk about the implications then for scenarios, and that'll get us really warmed up for our second breakout. So I guess my question for everyone is, as you were discussing these themes, do you have any questions for other teams? Is there something that you, as you were sort of starting to think about, maybe you wanted to hear from another team about, like, well, I wonder what they are thinking, or I wonder how this team approached this, especially given how other teams, really sort of helped to shape like the scenarios and the discussions that we've been having. So in the chat, or feel free to speak up, does anyone have a question for other teams along the lines of the themes? Curiosity about how other teams are starting to look at this. Dee has a question for the collective. You want to get the blank worksheet? We can have a link to that. So Beth has a question. She said, okay, so this is a good question. So how did other groups get to the question about high school overcrowding, and sort of what have been approaches around thinking about that, and has anyone discussed Madison? So thoughts, or anyone who has an answer to that question?
Dee, can I nominate you? We just had a conversation about the high school issues. Would you feel comfortable sharing what we were talking about?
Sure, no problem. So we feel like when you look at a map, outer Southeast has one high school, it's Franklin. And then all of Southeast has two high schools, Cleveland. And Northeast has 4 schools, 3 of which are under-enrolled. And so it's just our feeling that we would like to come up with a solution that makes sense for our cluster as a whole, and that there's plenty of capacity in the closer in Southeast, Northeast neighborhoods to do this work that we're being forced to do. Bridger is at Hawthorne, but Buckman is at Burnside and close in, and Sunnyside is, Beaumont and close in. They're farther north than us, and they're closer in than us, and the traffic patterns in that part of town are safer than ours. And so we just feel like as we're comparing 9, 10, and 11, I would love for people to not make their decisions based on a 5% difference in high school enrollment, when I feel like we could solve our Southeast enrollment by pushing the Northeast boundary a little farther south, instead of us trying to go north to fill a Northeast high school. I would like to see our cluster stay together. I would like to see us pick a solution that's healthy for everybody. And it just feels like that it's coming down to sort of that high school utilization. And I think that can be solved elsewhere.
Great. Thanks for saying that. And it looks like Alexandra is also sort of like, maybe this is something that we can talk about in phase 2 in agreement with you. And we've got some folks who thought that was a good point. Michael Bacon nominated Carl or Adam to maybe talk a little bit about that as well. Talk how your group tried to find some common ground.
Yeah, in relation to high school overcrowding, we discussed, the point of between Cleveland, Franklin, and Madison. I think the decision has to be made: are we either going to do incremental steps, or bolder steps to bring down the overcrowding at Franklin and Cleveland, and up the enrollment at Madison.
And did your group talk about timing, or did they express an incremental or a dramatic? Did they land on something?
We expressed dramatic.
Dramatic.
Yeah.
And did you talk about the timing?
Well, we didn't have all the information. Like, for example, it was raised, would Marshall, the possibility of Marshall being reopened. And so we just didn't have a lot of information to think through the timing piece of it.
Okay, great. Any other, we just got I love the chat is being used for nominations. I like it. So Marissa, would you mind talking a little bit about how Holgate addressed this issue of high school overcrowding? Or what your discussion was about?
Yeah, that was not the specific issue that I think that we were talking about. But yeah, we agree with what Dee was talking about addressing that in phase 2 with boundary changes. But yeah, we mostly discussed how scenario 11 does not meet the needs of the communities and what the coalition was charged with.
So I'm going to pause you right there because we're going to go into the details of the scenario. Just yet, Marissa, and I know that you were volunteered, but hold on one moment. But I guess I'm wondering, did you guys, in talking about the themes, was there any place where you started to find some common ground in the group on any of those themes around like high school overcrowding, anything like that?
Well, yes, we did find some common ground that I was going to talk about, but not just specifically about high school overcrowding.
Okay, where did you find common ground in those themes?
Okay, we found common ground in the issue that Harrison Park is the most diverse school represented in the coalition, that it is being that the kind of one of the few non-negotiable points of this process is that Harrison Park will be turned into a middle school, and then the elementary school disappears. So our group feels that it needs to be a priority to have a K-5 school in the boundaries of the Harrison Park neighborhood. And that we think that we can really find some common ground and get behind having the neighborhood K-5 school at Clark. And that doesn't mean at all that we, regarding the concerns from creative science families, that does not mean that we want creative science school to, dissolve, that it just needs a new location. And we think that's a phase 2 issue. But, we think that the survey data was a representative sampling of all the school communities, and that we need to listen to that and not necessarily hear like continued interjections from other community members. We think that schools like Harrison Park that have historically been under-resourced, that families are used to feeling the way that a lot of families from other schools are feeling right now, like they're not in control, like they don't have a voice in the process. And so our families maybe have not participated as much because this is like the status quo for these families. There are also issues of participation because of things like immigration status that makes it unsafe for some families to participate. There are cultures where people come from a a country with a more oppressive government and don't believe in participating in like government-led processes. There are so many issues involved. And so we just really, I'm thinking we can maybe come together and agree that Clark can be a K-5 school for this neighborhood, because that is what the neighborhood wants and needs, and it's a matter of equity. Thank you.
So Marissa, can I ask you a question? So as you talked about the demographic diversity of Harrison Park, can you give us a little bit more flavor of the conversation around the importance of the neighborhood school? Did you talk about wanting to see that same sort of demographic diversity? And maybe I want to encourage you to sort of be specific about like what type of demographic diversity were you speaking of? Just socioeconomic? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, racial and socioeconomic diversity. I mean, as far as there is so that in Portland. I mean, Montevilla is a multicultural neighborhood for Portland. It's not, I think also we want to sort of counter this, perception that it's sort of like a Chinese enclave or something. It's a multicultural, many cultures are represented in the Harrison Park neighborhood. A big concern of the neighborhood families is proximity between an elementary and a middle school, like being in close proximity so that siblings can care for each other. There are childcare issues for our families. And so there are many cultures involved here. It's not like, I know the proposal, there have been a lot of comments about the proposal to move Chinese DLI to this neighborhood because it has the highest Chinese population, but that it really just has the highest population of most of the cultures represented.
And I will interject. I just feel like I have to, that, that has been one of the biggest things that have come up with our families. It is part of the community. We have a high level of family engagement, and it looks very different at Harrison Park because of the different languages and cultures, and our families want to stay there. Even with difficulties, they are definitely part of the community and want to remain in that community. And they aren't going to be in a situation like this, largely because of language barriers and just right now, capacity, the ability to do any more than they're already doing. They're staying afloat. And I again will say, there are some of our neediest families, and we have to keep that at the forefront of everything if we're really talking about equity.
So, so it sounds like the way that your group sort of found common ground around talking about sort of demographic equity was that you wanted to make sure that there was a way to maintain diversity of the school, and also make sure that there was like a neighborhood option that didn't add additional transportation burdens. So I want to ask the group, did anyone else find common ground around the issue of demographic equity, or talk about that sort of issue of demographic equity? I'm going to take us back to high school in a moment. Yes. But I wanted to just get a little bit of conversation about this. Were you going to ask about the high school piece?
Yes, I'm just wondering, I know that Madison is being remodeled right now. How long is that remodel going to last? And in theory, all high schools are going to be remodeled at some point. And I know the Marshall campus eventually will become available in theory. When will that occur?
So the Madison should be finished by the fall of 2021. I don't know the exact answer for the Marshall campus, but we can get that to you. So going back to the question about how folks, did any other group get to the theme about demographic equity, and was there an ability to find some common ground around the way that you thought about sort of how to either promote or analyze or think about demographic equity?
This is Sabrina. Our group talked about this. I was in Carl's group, and as he was mentioning with the high school, a big piece of common ground in our group was if we are just going to tinker, then we're just going to get very similar results. And if we're going to be transformative, then that's going to be a big, bold process. And I think our common ground was like a little bit of frustration, to be honest, with the tinkering. Because if we're just tinkering, then we're really not going to change the demographics. And we're not going to create equity if we just tinker.
All right. So you found common ground on wanting to sort of see bold, highly leveraged moves to be able to achieve that. All right. Any other group have find common ground on the equity issue? All right. I want to come back to, it seems like Emily, Team Foster talked about a place where you found some common ground is in the desire to have dual strands in the school. Emily, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
No, I mean, just I know that we spoke about, we felt that it was important for whatever decision that was made, we would like to see the dual strand in the schools on both sides, if it's a DLI and or a neighborhood, just because that seems like a better outcome for everyone. I know that we're worried about space in certain buildings, but other than that, it seemed like everyone was on board with having those dual strands.
Thank you. Sorry to volunteer you. Sorry, not sorry. Okay, any other group want to sort of share with the larger group about where you found some common ground? All right. Well, so as you start to, it sounds like people started getting into the scenarios and started thinking about some like trade-offs. I guess one of the things I want to sort of put out there is, you know, as you think about sort of how to prioritize getting towards a single scenario, we've got 3 for you to sort of think about tonight. What are some trade-offs or some places where there might have to be some compromise or sort of like continued coming together around these themes that might guide your decision? So I heard Dee, for example, talk about, you know, the 5% at the high school level really shouldn't impact the larger decision around the K-8s. And we heard Sabrina's group and Carl's group talk about how, the sort of looking for high leverage, sort of transformational movements so that we can maybe sort of move towards achieving some of these tensions. What are some other things that come to mind as you think about how you're going to identify your sort of scenario that you prefer? So it looks like in the chat, there's some discussions about kind of what's phase 1 and phase 2. So folks are going to continue to talk about that. I think folks are thinking creatively about the Marshall campus.
I'm curious, sorry, it backtracks just a second, but was there a group that reached a different consensus around the issue of, I guess we call it sort of differing definitions of equity, but around the Clark building specifically, or that it's like, if there's not a leading question at all, but like, is there an argument for not trying to find a way to use the Clark building as some sort of, if not a neighborhood school, at least as something that is a K-5 school in the Harrison Park neighborhood?
Yeah, why don't we put that out to the group? Was there any conversation about the Clark building? Sabrina, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I don't know as if I can say that our whole group has the same feeling about this, but I did want to share one quick and stop me, Danny, if I don't keep it quick, quick perspective on that, which is our group did talk about how it is going to be important that PPS addresses the whole focus option school and equity issues with any focus option school, DLI or not. That aside, as the principal at Vestal, which is a school that is very under enrolled and ended up having access, the access program co-located with us because we had space. I can tell that my biggest worries are the unspoken about impacts of having a school without a home. And if, regardless of if we think creative science, doesn't matter what we think, they are a school. And to make a decision where they are left without a home is not good for them. But in the bigger picture, like at Vestal, I would never have guessed that we were going to have another program co-located with us. And the impacts of that have been deep and wide. And that school has been co-located a few times before they landed at Vestal. So I think we can't pretend that by just saying we'll come up with another space for creative science is a responsible choice. So that's I have a hard time getting off my zero on that one.
Okay, so you're sort of cautioning about the what I affectionately call the kick the can strategy, right? Of sort of like that if we push too many, that we have to be cautious in the way that we push decisions out because there's an impact, especially if it involves like a whole school. I heard that I saw in the chat, Beth said, in terms of maybe identifying some trade-offs. DLI strands coming together for middle school in one building and avoiding single strands of neighborhood programs in K-5, that was going to be sort of guiding. And then I heard from, and then neighborhood program at Clark. And then I read, Sheila said at Beth, me too. So, so I think what I want to do now is it's 7:30 and we want to make sure that you have lots of time for some discussion about this next piece, right? So we tried to, and I want to be really, transparent in that as we were sort of thinking that you have been really grappling with really sort of like nuanced and tough decisions. And so what we wanted to do now is just to kind of have you pull up just a little bit and sort of start to think about themes so that we could sort of get you back into trying to get to some tough themes, some tough decisions. And so what we really want to do is spend this next breakout group. If we can go to the next slide, we have a really tough question, right? So between these three scenarios, we want you to sort of come back to the full group and we'll have a pretty robust discussion about, we want you to come back with, of the three scenarios, which is the one that your group favors. And I want to be really clear that this is not that we're going to be we're going to temper what we mean by favors, right? So what we're trying to do is to give the community, the larger community beyond the guiding coalition, an opportunity for them to sort of like weigh in, right? So we're going to temper what this means to the community. We're going to make very clear that this is not a decision. We're going to make sure that this is not representing everyone's absolute ideal, right? That this is sort of like has arrived out of a lot of compromise, a lot of discussion, out of trying to find common ground on what are really deep and important issues that are extremely complex. And so I want to, for the sake of the discussion, I am going to ask you to come back with a answer, right? So your only sort of task is to go through the scenarios and after discussing them, come back with, of those three, which is one that your group favors. So this is the time to go into those details. Jed is available and can continue to kind of visit with you. Your facilitators and note takers we think that we have all the data at our fingertips. We're going to try to find you easy ways to sort of access that. And so hopefully we can sort of have some really robust discussion. We'll come back as a group. We'll hear how it went. the only thing that I ask of you is that you come back with a favor. And I want to hear if it's a favor by 5 degrees, a favor by a half a degree. We're ready to have that conversation, but we do want you to land on 1 so that we can start our conversation, and we can certainly see where all the different groups are. Between now and 7:40, you have a chance to go stretch your legs, get a snack, and then we'll come back as a group. You'll come back to your groups at 7:40, ready to discuss. All right. And if we'll also comb the chat and make sure that if there's questions coming out that we get the right answers, and we'll put stuff in chat as well. All right, we'll see you in 10 minutes in your small groups, and then after that, we'll see you in the large group. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had some really fruitful conversations. So this is where the rubber hits the road, where the kernel hits the mustard, cuts the mustard. So what we're going to do is, if we go to the next slide, we're going to just do a quick report out by each of your groups. And we're going to see kind of where you landed. So Team Duke, what scenario did you land on? And feel free to either chat it to us, or someone from Team Duke let us know, 9, 10, or 11. Team Foster, you're on deck to report out, and then Flavel. So Team Duke.
Hi, it's Lisa. I'm the parent.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi there. So there wasn't too much enthusiasm for number 11. There seemed to be a little bit more for 10 and 9. Jackson, who is our student in our group, Jackson, if you want to chime in here and support me, because your brain works better than mine. Is he going to pop in?
Yeah.
Just for his reasoning. Go ahead, Jackson. Thank you.
So thank you, Lisa. So about 9 and 10, those were my top ones just when we did the original consensus building, just because having the Mandarin DLI for 1 going to Franklin just made sense to me. I mean, Franklin's super close to the Jade District. I think it might even be in it. So having that Mandarin DLI go there just makes sense to me. And also having Mount Tabor go to Madison also made sense to me, just distance-wise.
All right. So if you were going to pick between 9 and 10, where did your group land? Even if it's only by like a degree or 2, which one seemed better?
We seemed to more talk about scenario 10 and being more in favor between 9 and 10. We didn't really talk that much about 9. Everybody just kept going. We kept focusing initially on 11, and then we realized nobody really liked it. So we then focused on 10. So if I had to pick something, I will say option 10.
Okay. And and we'll recognize that there may not be complete consensus around there, but there was like a leaning towards.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to Team Foster. What was the scenario that you landed on? I know the answer, but
I guess I can speak with one exception. We did have an exception. The rest of us went with scenario 10.
Great, thank you. Okay, Team Flavel. Someone from Team Flavel, and that means that Team Hawthorne and Team Holgate, you're on deck. So Team Flavel, pardon me.
Well, I'm starting to be optimistic we might find some consensus, because we also with some reservations, but of the 3 favored 10, and we also discussed a few potential changes we could make, which I don't think this sounds like it's the time for, but yeah, I would say 10 was the one we thought was closest to the.
We had maybe sort of like a minor request. It's probably not the right time, but I still want to throw it out there that there's concern that Franklin is still over enrolled, and part of Woodstock would prefer to stay at Cleveland. So we felt like maybe a reasonable compromise would be that both Chinese immersion programs would feed to Cleveland together, despite having different middle school or different elementary locations, and that that might potentially be a compromise with 10 that could help everybody out a little bit more.
That's great.
We also have a lot of concerns with some of the boundaries and stuff, but yes, 10 in principle, we think 10 is workable.
Okay, I want you to hold on to that. And then Andy, if you could like knock on wood or something just to undo the jinx, that would be great. On your honor, just do whatever you need to do. Okay, and then Dee, if you could hold on to that suggestion. Okay, Team Hawthorne, what do you got there? Where did you guys land?
Yeah, so we talked about scenario 9 and took a journey to get there. I think there's consensus, no preference for 11. And so it was really between 9 or 10. And I know Mount Tabor and Harrison Park going to Madison was a discussion, as well as Chinese DLI at Bridger, and just impacts to enrollment. And so I think Cleveland has also come up in our conversation. So I'll stop here. Do any of my group members want to talk about
can I ask
how
you
scenario 9 works for you?
Okay. So, but can I ask you a follow-up? It seems like folks were leaning towards 9.
That's right.
Okay, we're gonna do that. I'm gonna come back to your group. We're gonna do some discussion for. I just kind of wanted to put this on here. So for Hawthorne, we have scenario 9. Andy, this is not your fault. So there we go. Team
They said no 11 though, so that's a ranked choice thing.
That's very good. Team Holgate.
Miss Marissa?
Yeah, I had already mentioned in the chat that we are advocates of scenario 10, and we want to make it clear that in that scenario, Clark is a neighborhood K-5 school, and that expands the neighborhood to include part of the Bridger neighborhood, and that we did see some positives of 9, but we, listening to middle school principals, thought that it was too difficult scheduling wise to have both Chinese and Russian DLI at the same middle school, and then taking Russian out of Lane leaves no DLI program at Lane and 2 at Harrison Park. So we thought that leaving it at Lane made more sense.
Great. So we'll go ahead and mark 10. We're going to come back to some of those things because I think we might be able to kind of work through and see. Okay, so then Team Powell.
So Team Powell voted for scenario 9 as it is the most balanced for the high schools and the middle schools, with the contingency that we do have a building for creative science. As well, we're also advocating for a second DLI strand at Lent to fix the problem of collocation. So 2 DLI strands at Lent, and then Atkinson all DLI, and then Bridger all neighborhood with a shared boundary between Atkinson and Bridger.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think what I want to try to do now, I started to write these down and then I wasn't getting all of these things. So what I want to do is just maybe, if we could, it looks like Andy was true to his word. There was no jinx there. That scenario 11 wasn't any of the groups preferred. So we'll take sort of scenario 11 off the table. And then I think what I want to hear a little bit more about, so I'm going to ask folks a question. I'm going to ask you one question, and it's going to be annoying, right? Because you're going to want to get to the fix. But what I want you to do is not get to the fix just yet, but I want you to individually in the chat for the scenario that you picked, if you could write the scenario that you picked, and if you could just write a sentence about what to you ultimately was the compelling, what was compelling that made you select that, even though we understand that these are shades of, degrees of thing, but just in terms of like your own decision making, what was compelling about that. So I'll give you a couple minutes, and don't worry, we'll be able to get to what we would fix, but I just want to kind of have everyone put there. So if you don't mind, before you write what was compelling, make sure that you add either 9 or 10 so that we know, so that we can see what's compelling. And we'll look at that in the chat, and I'll give you, it's 8:24, so I'll give you like 4 minutes just to kind of write down what was compelling. If you could just write that in the chat, Dee. To everyone, sorry. Great. Give you a couple more minutes. Ultimately, what was the decision maker here?
I'm sorry, are we supposed to write this down or say it out loud?
In the chat, if you don't mind. That way I can see them and I can refer back to them. I'm bad at taking notes. Thank you, Martha.
Okay, thank you.
Then once you've written yours down, feel free to look at the chat, and you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to see ignore what's the scenario and see where you can find if what's compelling is the same as the other folks.
Hi, Danny. Can we ask, sorry, this is Michael. Can we ask questions of those supporting one or the other? Are we going to get to that at some point?
Yes. You're
okay, perfect.
Huh. Okay, give everyone another 76 seconds. Go ahead and take your time reading. Tell us not only your number, but also what was most compelling about that. Okay, about 23 more seconds. So as you're reviewing other people's comments, so you see kind of like what was compelling. I want to invite some dialogue amongst yourselves to see if you don't mind asking some questions around clarification, right? Asking questions around like adding more detail or even sort of questions that might help you understand a little bit more about that perspective. So the gentleman that just
Michael, yeah.
Michael.
Hi, Danny. I'll start it.
Will you? Yeah. So since you were mind reading, let's put your question out there to one of the comments.
Sure. So scenario 9, I see a lot of people saying balance or balance, better balanced, or saying there's no overcrowding, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I would like to hear more about what that balance means, because when I think about the two phases, you got phase 1, you got phase 2. I'm not thinking about overcrowding when I'm looking at these two scenarios because I know phase 2 is coming, right? So phase 2 is going to probably take care of some of that overcrowding issues. But I think, I want to hear the balance, I guess, message that I've seen now, I don't know, a few times. So if anybody would please help me understand what you mean when you say balance, I would appreciate that.
Sure. And is Regina's son here?
Hi, Danny.
Hi, Regina. Would you mind expanding a little bit?
I'm thinking about co-located DLI programs. We're talking about the difference between 9 and 10. In our group, we discussed a lot about the concern of having a single strand of, any school really having, not then having a healthy co-located program with DLI. And so that being an issue, but then also looking further down the road in terms of bringing those programs together at the middle school and the high school. Specifically for me, when I think about balance, when I look at the scenarios, as I stated in my comment, looking at high school enrollment, especially considering, I personally would move for more to make more bigger changes in this first phase, and then making more refined essentially changes or additional changes in the latter phase. As we look at, because what we kind of decide then also impacts what phase 2 will look like. And so I think that, at least for me, is part of the decision when I look at the differences between scenario 9 and scenario 10. So, and Bridger's a piece of that, because in the other two scenarios, Bridger's, way over 100% without portables. And the high school overcrowding, like I said before. And then feeder patterns, split feeders, in terms of middle schools feeding to high schools.
Great. Thank you, Regina. Let's get another question out there. Who has another question? And then we'll try to find someone to answer that question. Clarification, helping you understand more detail. Okay. So let's turn a little bit. Let's pivot a little bit. We're going to ask you to type some more things into the chat, and we're going to be exercising our scrolling digits here, because I want you to kind of try to look at all of your peers here and see kind of where they're coming from in the two questions. So in the chat, what I want to do right now is that if you could magically change one thing about your scenario, what would you change to improve it, to either to achieve those goals? Okay. And then we're going to give you, we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. So if you could change one thing about the scenario, what would you change? And then how can we move forward?
No segregation of Latinx families to Lent, as families have been very clear that they're being segregated and pushed out.
That is, thank you for answering that. If you could also type it into the chat so that we have so everyone can look at that. Do you mind doing that, Martha?
Would love to.
So if you could, the thing that you would change, and this is the thing that you would change about your preferred scenario. So if you selected scenario 9, you're picking something to change to make it that degree of something a little bit better. Okay, let's take like another 71 seconds. I would encourage you to look at both what's compelling about each one and then look at the proposed changes. And then I have a question for the group. Okay. So what I'd like folks to do is to take a look at those potential changes. Think about some of your own sort of, hesitations, pros, cons, challenges, things that sort of made you question, and see if there's anything either that you proposed yourself or anything that someone else proposed that might make you consider a difference between the two scenarios. So just think about that for a moment. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask someone from scenario 10 to make the case to folks who favor scenario 9, ways that you think that the things could be optimized for the group to have the whole group support scenario 10. Oh, and then, yeah, so I think for this exercise tonight, I think what we do want to present to the community is one scenario, and there's a couple of reasons why. We want to have the one scenario so that we can really kind of go deeper with their feedback. It's incredibly difficult to get to the level of detail and to spend the time with in both, even in focus groups, to kind of do either justice. So we want to do this, and again, I want to temper that the scenarios are not going to be sort of presented in anything other than this is a straw man. This is a first attempt. We're grappling with really difficult problems, but we want to try to get to one, because what we're trying to do is, as you'll see, is that there's complexity, trying to narrow it down to one, and then we need to kind of continue to address complexity. So we do need to get down to one today. So so knowing that, for this, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take a poll amongst everyone to see where the group lands on between scenario 9 and scenario 10. What I would like to do, though, is give someone from scenario 10 an opportunity to kind of make the case for scenario 10, and then we'll turn it over to one person from who sort of is in support of scenario 9 to make the case for scenario 9, and then we'll go into voting. So is there someone from scenario 10 that feels like with either with the changes or with the sort of what everyone likes now that they'd like to summarize scenario 10? And I picked 10 because it was an even number. But if someone from scenario 9 wants to go first, we could do that.
I can talk about 9 if there isn't somebody ready from 10. So I'm making a case for it. That's what I'm doing. Okay. So I think the best case for it is to tell you the rationale behind it. And this was something that our group discussed quite a bit, both tonight and in previous meetings, that developmentally, it's really important for kids to travel from middle school to high school together. And so looking at ways to avoid split feeders and keep middle school and middle school communities together as they travel up to high school was a goal here, along with ensuring DLI in multiple locations for K-5. So not having having all the DLI community for one language in one K-5 school, so that there was access in multiple points of the city for K-5, and then bringing those programs together for robust, more diverse middle school experiences that then stayed together through high school. So those were kind of the driving factors for this one. Another thing that I really like about it is that while we have co-located programs, there are no single neighborhood strands in this scenario. And also I do have to mention that when the scenario was created, the intention was there would be 2 strands of Spanish DLI at Lent. So that would be a balanced co-located program. And I don't know how that got translated into one strand at the data, but so the idea was creating those balanced programs so that we could continue to have robust DLI and neighborhood in multiple points of the city and bring them together. Particularly in neighborhoods where the school building is fairly isolated, like for Lent being on the east side of I-205, it felt really challenging to ask students who were not involved in the DLI program to travel to a different neighborhood elementary school. And so having the access to both DLI and neighborhood option in the Clark building and in the Lent building was something that was under consideration.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for going first. And thank you for that. All right. Someone from scenario 10.
I can speak to scenario 10.
Great. Thank you.
I think our reasoning behind scenario 10 really stemmed from the point of having not having multiple languages at the middle school level, because we understand how hard that is to schedule. We do have Harrison Park in our group, and I think that came up a lot. Also, we kind of started at a point where, and we've talked about this before this evening, Harrison Park is having a ton of change with this whole process, and they do need a neighborhood school for their community. I'm personally from Marysville, and I think our community is very diverse as well, and is a pedestrian school quite a bit. So I can totally understand the reasoning for having that there. I also just looked at the goals that we were set up to do, and that was to consolidate DLI programs. And I really don't think we can consolidate one program, Spanish or Chinese, without consolidating the other. That seems really disequitable. to say, hey, you know, all Chinese speakers have to go to one school, but not the other. I also come from a neighborhood school, and neighborhood schools are looked at as second-class schools, and they are not supported the same way as focus options and language schools are. So if we could make really strong neighborhood schools as well as language schools and have them all succeed as a first step, then maybe we could open up some schools to support other languages such as Vietnamese or so many others that are spoken in our city. We need to open up the room for other programs and not just stay with the same programs we are. And we need to support our neighborhood schools with funding, especially in outer Southeast as well. So I'm not sure if anybody in my team has more to say about that.
You did great, Alexandra. Thank you so much for doing that. Thanks for volunteering. Okay, so I think both Beth and Alexandra were very compelling. I think that, and listening to that, I think we're those common themes, those sort of like tensions and the complexities that underlie the tensions, not only in the strategy, but also in the sort of like implementation of those strategies. You can really see where it gets complex. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up a poll, and we're just going to take the temperature of the room right now. So after hearing Beth, after hearing Alexandra, after looking at the chat, and I want to encourage folks to one of our sort of operating agreements is to really try to listen to believe and to listen to understand, and to sort of like be open to maybe doing something differently. I want to kind of encourage you to kind of sit in that place of agreement. And before you click on the scenario, just want to ask you to kind of continue to go up and down the scroll. Think about like what's resonating with you. Maybe try to locate why it might be resonating with you, and sort of then making your vote. And so we're going to keep the vote open for a moment, and then we're going to and then we'll see the results. So it's 8:46. Go ahead and start voting. Reflect on what you heard from Beth, what you heard from Alexandra, some of the other comments that we've heard tonight throughout the thing. Which scenario would we like to take to the open house for community feedback? It doesn't mean that we don't come back to another elements of scenarios. It doesn't mean that we are doing anything other than asking the community, like, here's where we are. Here's some place where we've gotten to. What do you think? Does it align with us? How does it not align? And then we keep on going. So go ahead and keep the polls open. There's 65 people here. I believe that maybe Nathan or Jed is going to tell me when we've got a good group of folks voted. So we're going to keep it open for maybe another 90 seconds, unless everyone has voted and I'm behind the times, and Nate and Jed will tell me.
I was just thinking there's so many things to read that I'd like to read through again. So
okay, no. So you're asking for more than 90 seconds, Lisa. I will give you that.
Well, I don't want to hold up the process. But
No, keep on going. Keep on reading. I'm gonna give you 120 seconds.
Oh no.
What happened?
I was gonna get a new app, but I pressed it. Oh no.
It looks like we have 64% of votes so far.
All right, we've got another 57 seconds of voting. I want to encourage folks to get your vote in. I'll do the 15-second countdown. All right. Gonna do 10 more seconds. Five more seconds. Then Nathan's gonna close it. He's gonna give me a thumbs up because he's also gonna give me a thumbs up if we've got a good number of people voting. Okay, good. All right. I think something magical is happening and we're going to see the results any second now. Maybe. All right, so I don't see it on my screen. Is it still tabulating the results, or is there a way to show the results of the poll? We're a patient bunch. We can wait for results from voting.
We're working on sharing those.
All right. While we're working on sharing those, we're pretty close to time. So what I'm going to propose that we do is that we take the sort of highest votes, and we take that there. And so we had a pretty solid majority. We had of the 13. No, sorry. I'm trying to do math out loud. Of the folks that voted, 29 voted for scenario 10, and 14 voted for scenario 9. So giving sort of scenario 10 a sort of over a 30% margin over the folks from scenario 9. So I want to be careful that we're not sort of seeing this as winners and losers, right? Like, this is just a moment in time. This is an indicator in time. There are still lots of outstanding issues. I think we heard that neither 9 nor 10 are completely perfect or where we'd like it to be. But for the purposes of having a sort of more intensive conversation with the larger community, we're going to take scenario 10 into our open house, and we're going to collect feedback from folks, and then we're going to come back to you and ask you to continue to kind of noodle with this new level of information. And then I think we're also going to continue to keep all of the different changes, really try to get crisp on presenting the information, getting you information in a timely way. I think what we need to do now is pivot over to Jed and to Esther to talk about volunteers for the open house. and sort of get those. I really want to thank everyone. I think that it's so apparent to me that you're grappling and really trying to sort of like live into these agreements, really live into our racial equity lens, really practice that sort of like, trying on different perspectives, trying to make things that work for your own interests, but also for the larger interests of our community. And I can't tell you how inspiring it is to be here on a Thursday night with so much engagement and so much discussion. I refuse to believe that Portland isn't one of the most special places in the world, because this community shows up and you do the work, and we really feel bolstered by all of your participation in the way that you're approaching this. And so I want you to know that I see all of you and all the work that you're doing, and I want to thank you. I'm going to give it to Esther to sort of lock in our volunteers for the open house.
Thank you very much, Danny. This was a very worthy exercise, and I am sure that it was very transparent, so people knew exactly how we arrived at the decision to take scenario 10 forward to the open house. So thank you so much. Now, the other thing that I want to ask is that we are looking for volunteers for the open house. We are looking for people who will be willing to field questions, to explain, to help others understand if they have questions around scenario 10. And we would like about 2 to 3 volunteers. So you don't necessarily have to tell us tonight. We would like you to tell us tonight if you can. But it would be nice to at least know who those people are by, say, Friday afternoon. So preference is tonight, but if you do not want to make the decision right away, please let us know by Friday afternoon. 2 to 3 volunteers, we'll take 3. Any thoughts?
Could you remind us of the plan for those volunteers?
The plan for the volunteers?
Yeah, I know you went over it at the beginning, but that was a long time ago and my brain didn't hold that information.
Okay. Not a problem at all. So
hey, Esther, I can recap on that if you'd like.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's going to be a live part of the program on Thursday night where we present the proposal, and it's always really helpful to hear perspectives from some of the coalition members that worked on it, both to talk about how it achieves some of the outcome goals, but I think importantly to, point out where work needs to be done. So that's what we're looking for. It's really kind of the same sorts of things that you've been doing here in the main room, just to do that alongside a few of us.
I am more than happy to volunteer, as I speak both English and Spanish and can happily translate for you, Jed, anytime.
Thank you, Miss Martha. Any others?
Sorry, are you volunteering like right now, like by putting our hands up, or I typed it in the chat?
You can just tell us you volunteered, then we'll just note that.
I volunteer.
Thank you, Dee. And do we have a third volunteer?
Question, whether there's a volunteer or not, there will be translator for the community, right?
There will be, yes. We will have people there to help translate as well. But remember
sorry, go ahead and finish.
Oh, I was just gonna say that, remember that sometimes the translators were not part of this process from beginning to the end. So if we have volunteers who have been part of the process, they're in a better position to give an in-depth response to whatever questions emerge. So that's why we want them there.
I can volunteer as well, Esther.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Appreciate it. So we have 3 volunteers. We have Martha, we have Dee, and we have Alexandra. and they'll be volunteering and assisting us with the open house on the 19th of November.
Well,
Next
I
slide.
still wanted to, sorry. I think it's very limiting and really disrespectful for our communities to not be able to handle two scenarios. And this process is already inequitable from the very beginning. And material is not translated for the community to even know what's going on. And even now, finally, there is survey available for in different languages, but without knowing what's going on, how are people going to comment? What are they going to comment on? And now we're not even provide more scenarios for people to even discuss. And how you want people to really be encouraged to speak up and they want to see just one scenario to talk about. And there's no other possibility. So I really think that we should have two scenarios.
And Min, I mean, I can talk about that from the coalition side of things. And, you know, I work in a not-for-profit. So I think we're presenting one scenario to see what the community wants to see as changes to that scenario, rather than presenting two scenarios. We're saying you have to vote for one or this one. Like, it allows for more community input for people to say, these are the issues we see with this scenario. Can we fix these issues? More so than just this or that.
Don't you think that having two scenarios available and people feel there's other possibility, we spend so much time and come up with those scenarios, and we see some merit in both, definitely. So, and trust with the community, they can, and also encourage them, or knowing that there are different scenarios, and they maybe can pick one from from both scenarios and make it have other suggestions.
Well, and I can say,
I just wanted to add, pardon me, Alexandra.
No,
I just wanted to add that even though one scenario is going to be presented on Thursday, that scenario is still going to be worked on. It is still going to be refined. We have 3 more meetings in December that will allow the community to do that. So it's not the fact that we present it means that it is going to go forward as is. There's more opportunities to work on it still. So if you have people who are interested in doing that, please make sure they show up on Thursday the 19th so they can be part of that process. I also do want to take this opportunity to thank you all for a very productive evening. I think of all the meetings, this has been very focused. It has also been very, very enlightening. It is our 9th meeting. We know that some issues emerged tonight, such as transportation, and a few others that will surface again on Thursday. But we want you to continue to think about scenario 10. You all have the packets and you all have the data, so that on the 19th, when we talk about the scenarios, there will be opportunities and there will be ideas that will emerge as a result of the harder studying that you have done. We cannot thank you enough for your level of engagement and enthusiasm in this whole advocacy for our schools and for our neighborhoods. Thank you to our volunteers. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday. We also want you to please continue to send in your comments via email, feedback forms, and through meeting evaluations. Remember that, again, we have 3 more meetings, so we're not yet done. It is nice to see light at the end of the tunnel, though. I want to seize this opportunity to also please remind you to complete the meeting evaluation form and our feedback form, because that is how we gather data for upcoming meetings. I want again to thank you all so much for a great evening. And I do want to wish you I do want to ask that you please stay safe, and we will see you on the 19th of November at the open house. Meeting is adjourned.
Can someone just please explain the difference between the open house on the 19th and the language focus meetings that are happening next week? We haven't heard anything about those. What is the difference?
I'll defer to Claire.
Actually, I think that Shanice is in the room. She's been, as she works as our in our community engagement, and she has been working with many in language access, et cetera, to create focus groups in native languages. So Shanice, can you speak to the focus groups for a moment?
Yes, and to answer really briefly, the answer is they're going to be reflecting on the same content, scenarios, and experience that we're working through in the open house, but wanting to do targeted, more accessible conversations. And so I know, especially in a virtual environment, sometimes smaller group conversations have real space for meaningful discussion, wealth of feedback, and feel more accessible for some folks. And so both our open house is happening in addition to the focus groups to allow multiple opportunities to reflect on some public review, feedback, and refinement on the scenario.
Thank you very much, Shanice. And Jennifer, if you have further questions, we will be very happy to connect you with Shanice going forward. Again, I do want to thank you all for your participation. Meeting is adjourned.
Is the chat available publicly? Because what's being captured there is very different than what's being on camera. So I just want to make sure that in the in what the community can view on the website, along with this video, they're also able to see the chat.
Not live, but we do post it onto the right with where the video link goes is the chat. History goes
well,
there
if
too.
that's the case, then let it be publicly said that in the chat, people are saying that they would like to present 2 scenarios, not just one, because we believe people are smart enough to be able to look at 2 scenarios rather than just one. And that women of color that are immigrant are being steamrolled within that process.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Stay safe, and we'll see you on Thursday.